This is PTV World. You're watching Faultlines and I'm your host Syed Shabahat Ali. After severe use of brute force and kinetic attacks for 11 days against innocent, unarmed citizens of Gaza, a ceasefire came into force on Friday morning after Egypt brokered an agreement between Israel and Hamas. Due to the absence of any independent media agency inside Gaza, we do not know the exact numbers of life losses. Yet, this was most devastating of all attacks on Gaza since 2014. Pakistan has welcomed the announcement of Gaza ceasefire, and a series of demonstrations are taking place across the country to mark a day of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Before the ceasefire, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi explains Pakistan's point of view to United Nations in a commendable manner. Watch what he said.
As we speak, children, women, and men in Palestine are being killed with impunity. In 1 week of Israeli attacks, over 250 Palestinians have been killed and thousands injured. 1/3 are women and children. Death echoes in every home in Gaza. There is limited access to water, food, hygiene, and health services. Gaza is plunged in darkness, literally and metaphorically. The only light is that of Israeli explosions. The voice of the Palestinian people cannot and will not be silenced. We, the representatives of the Islamic world, are here to speak with them and for them. Mr. President, it is appalling that the Security Council has been unable to exercise its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, our first priority must be to halt the Israeli aggression. I hope that even at this 11th hour, the Security Council will call for a cessation of Israeli attacks. The General Assembly should call for concrete steps to protect the Palestinians. The General Assembly should condemn Israel's forcible and illegal eviction of Palestinians, including in Al-Jarrah. I end with a verse from a great resistance poet of Pakistan. "E arz-e Palestine, main bhi hazir hoon. O land of Palestine, I too am there for you."
Naqvi Saab, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
This is very evident now that after 11 days of fight, there is a ceasefire between the two sides. Do you think this is a sustainable arrangement? It's dependable, as United States has announced to come for reconstruction in Gaza. Do you see this as a sustainable arrangement to begin with?
I don't think so. I think there will again be some excuse invoked by the Israeli authorities, and they will say that the Hamas is not sticking to the ceasefire, something like that. You see, there is bad blood between them. There is lack of trust between them. And therefore, and in this case, Israel is the more aggressive factor. So I expect Israel to create a problem again. It suits them to crack down hard on the Hamas, despite the massive and the incredible human suffering that they have inflicted upon the Palestinian people. This ceasefire, as far as it goes, it's holding for the last 2 days. That is good. That is better than the fighting. But I don't think it will hold on for too long, because there is mistrust and bad blood between.
But Naqvi Saab, there is a vicious circle between these two sides. we see Israel doing atrocities against the people in the West Bank and particularly Jerusalem city, then Muslims coming out for protest, then Hamas jumping into the picture and Israel responding back, or sometimes Israel becoming the aggressor first and Hamas responding back. It evidently looks an unbreakable circle of violence. What are your comments on it?
Well, you see, this is true. This has been going on not only recently. For the last 11 days, it actually has a history of mistrust and consequent violence between the two sides since at least 2002, if not before, because even before there was the same situation. But let us look at recent history. And in 2004, in 2008, then 2014, then 2020, there have always been these eruptions of violence where the Israelis have tried to punish the Palestinians for some flimsy ground of rock throwing or now rocket attacks. These are very small armaments or instruments that they are using. The Israelis are bombing the place. They are launching bomb attacks through aircraft. They are they are holding artillery fire against the population by tanks and by other heavy military equipment. So it is a very unequal fight, and it is unfortunately at the cost of the innocent Palestinian people, the men, women, and children, many who are getting killed, many who are injured, and the trauma of the suffering, of the attacks is wreaking havoc on the population of.
Naqvi Sahab, over a period of time, we have seen a shift in the diplomatic discourse as well. Initially, the Arab states would have taken a lead whenever the crisis would erupt from the land of Palestine. But now we see countries like Pakistan, Sudan, and Turkey taking a more vocal and a lead role instead. And I would also want you to comment on this remarkable speech by Shah Mahmood Qureshi, which people are applauding as being the true representation of the sentiment of people of Pakistan.
Yes, I think let me first talk about Pakistan. It goes back to Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech at the UN General Assembly in 2018, and subsequently in 2019, sorry, and subsequently in 2020, and also this year. And then during this fight of 11 days, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has been very active. In the first place, he visited friendly countries which are likewise concerned about the situation, like Turkey. And then he traveled with the foreign ministers of Turkey and I think one more foreign minister to New York. And there he made a remarkable speech in which he has represented the sentiments of the Muslim world and the gross sense of outrage that all the Muslim countries feel at the aggressive and high-handed behavior of Israel against the Palestinian population. Now they are doing this in the Gaza Strip as well as now in the West Bank. So the Israeli government is launching a no-holds-barred attack on innocent civilian population, which is in violation of all canons of international law.
Naqvi Sahab, more than 50 times the resolution against Israel has been stopped, vetoed by United States. US is now patronizing, I mean, it's not now, they have been patronizing the state of Israel. But does that bring questions to the credibility of institutions like Security Council? You have served there. Can you tell us how satisfied or unsatisfied you are with this behavior of this grand institution?
Well, you see, United Nations Security Council is supposed to be responsible for the peace and security of the world, and consequently to ensure that any area or any region where there is a conflict, armed conflict, should be dealt with in such a manner that the violence should cease, the conflict should cease, and peace is established. Now, this is the Charter of the United Nations, this is the mandate of the United Nations Security Council. But unfortunately, all international organizations are at the mercy of their membership, and the memberships depend upon are weighted in favor of those countries which are providing greater contribution to the running of that organization. United States is a very big contributor to the United Nations. As such, what the United States wants generally prevails. And I think in this case, the US has been in favor of Israel, has been very reluctant to condemn Israeli action. In fact, they have not done so, and they have only called for ceasefire, but they have ignored the massive violation of human rights, the suffering of the Palestinian people, and the unrestrained, irresponsible, reckless killing and attacking being carried out by the Israeli army.
Thank you very much, Naqvi Saab, for being the guest in my program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join back with the second segment of the program. Stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we tried to take some representation of the people of Palestine in our program, and we managed to catch hold of our guest in the second segment of the program, who is Mr. Dawood Qutb. He is DG Community Media Network. He'll be talking to us over the phone. He's a Palestinian journalist by his origin, but currently based in New York. He'll be over the phone with me. And from Tehran, I have Professor Ilham Qad Khodai. She is a professor from the University of Tehran. I welcome both of my guests to the program. Mr. Dawood, my first question. We have heard about the issue of Jordan Valley from the West Bank. And while the attention of the world media has been on the city of Gaza, there are some concerns regarding the Jordan Valley where the Israelis are starting their settlements. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
The Jordan Valley is an area that Israel tries to hold on to even in any negotiations. They feel that this is a buffer zone that will protect them from invading Arab countries. But of course, the Jordan Valley is 30% of the West Bank, and Palestinians refuse to give up a single inch of the Jordan Valley, which is part of the West Bank and Gaza, which, by the way, both the West Bank and Gaza areas only represent 22% of historic Palestine. So Palestinians have given a lot by accepting the two-state solution, including the Jordan Valley, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza.
Professor Ilham, why United Nations always have a lame role to play when it comes to the issue of Palestine? Why United Nations has not been able to effectively enforce its own decisions, its own judgments?
Well, regarding the UN response to what has happened in Palestine, in Gaza. It's not something new. We know that since 1972, there had been at least 53 resolutions against Israel that have been vetoed by the United States, and this is something that happens all the time. I believe this type of attitude from the United States actually emboldens Israel in terms of using disproportionate violence and force against the Palestinian people. And by the way, we have to keep in mind that the UN Security Council has never been based or founded upon the principle of justice. It's been founded on the principle of power. So you have 5 countries which emerged after the Second World War as the most powerful countries in the world. So they reserve this veto right for themselves, and this never ensures the kind of justice for other countries. So I think the whole issue should be understood in the context of the US-Israel special relationship, which is a multifaceted issue. Actually, it's not just political. You see this special relationship being enforced in all types of different realms, including cultural and political and legal terms. So the US absolutely guarantees its support under any circumstances for Israel, and that's very much problematic.
But Ilham, why Islamic countries have not been able to create a unanimous voice against this issue? I mean, this is an issue of absolute interest for all these Islamic countries. There is a Israeli state in the heartland of Arab world that is doing these atrocities against Muslims. Why Muslims cannot have a unanimous voice from any platform?
As we have witnessed, the people of Gaza were being massacred for at least 11 days without any meaningful response by the countries, the Arab and Muslim countries in the region mainly. I believe that the big problem here is a lack of unity among Arab and Muslim countries in the region regarding their reaction and their policy towards the Israeli regime. I believe a big problem here, a big obstacle here is a lack of domestic legitimacy, because many of these countries are actually monarchies. They don't represent the will of their own people. So you see that the majority of the people in the region, according to the many polls that have been carried out, they support the Palestinian cause and they are against Israeli occupation, but the leaders and the states do not represent the will, the true will of the people. So they are very much in need of a kind of foreign support in terms of managing to stay in power. So many of these countries need American support. They are also importing surveillance technology from Israel in order to be able to somehow control their own people. So I think that's a very important issue to have in mind. I believe that if these countries change course, if they pay attention to the true demands of their own people, this is the first phase. And the second phase is that these countries all come together in terms of managing to have a unified response towards the violent policies of the Israeli regime towards the Palestinian people, and then something more meaningful would definitely come out of this.
Mr. Daoud, I'm coming back to you. The political struggle of Palestinians is still divided. We see Hamas very active in Gaza City, and then Palestine Liberation Organization in the western region, in the eastern part of Palestine. Both of these organizations have their different strategy. How do you see their political effort that is still divided and not yielding any results?
Palestinians are still divided on a number of levels. On the one level, Palestinians, moderate Palestinians in the PLO, want to have a solution, end of the conflict solution as a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza alongside of Israel, whereas the Islamic movements, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, are still saying that all of Palestine, historic Palestine, is an Islamic Waqf area and it should be part of the state of Palestine. Also, Palestinians differentiate on how to regain and liberate Palestine. The PLO wants to do it in negotiations. Hamas and Islamic Jihad think that you need to use force because Israel only understands violence and force.
So, which of these two political ideologies, these two political schools of thoughts, do you personally support or you believe are doing better for the sake of Palestinian people?
I don't have a preferential between Hamas and other organizations. I do think that the non-violent struggle that the PLO has tried to accomplish is a more logical one, and it's the one that has more effectiveness in the long term. Sure, in the short term, the use of rockets can have some short-term results, but I think in the long term, people who want to become neighbors need to have a different style of cooperation.
Professor Ilham, where does Iran stand in this entire crisis? We have seen Pakistan, Turkey, Sudan taking lead on this issue, but haven't heard a lot about Iran.
Well, it's not just the Iranian government, but also the Iranian people who have always supported the Palestinian cause and who have always been against the Israeli regime and its occupation of Palestine. And this is not something just related to this specific situation or the recent years. This has always been true even before the victory of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. So even before we had the Islamic Republic of Iran, the people who were fighting against the Pahlavi regime, the revolutionary people and leaders, many of the ideologues of the Islamic Revolution, people like Shahid Motahari, people like Imam Khomeini himself, a significant part of their discourse was the issue of Palestine and the issue of the need for people throughout the world, and not just the Muslims, to somehow stand up against Israeli oppression of the Palestinian people. So you see, if you refer to many of speeches by Imam Khomeini, you would actually encounter many instances in which he is actually pointing to this issue. He even states that one reason why we are standing up or why we stood up against the Shah is his support of Israel. So you see that this issue is one of the main defining factors behind the ideology actually of the Islamic Republic of Iran, to support any oppressed people throughout the world, specifically the Palestinian people. And also, I think what's important to keep in mind is that Iran has always been fighting and standing up against all types of extremism in the region, whether that extremism is the Israeli occupation and Israeli settler colonialism or ISIS. So we see that Iran had a significant role that it played in fighting and defeating ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, and standing up and supporting the people of Iraq and the people of Syria, also the people of Lebanon in their fight and in their battle against Israeli occupation of their lands. So I think this is a very important feature of the Islamic Republic of Iran, both the government and the people.
Ilham, Iran has been accused of supporting Hamas. Israel has been very vocal on it. How do you comment on it? Does the government of Iran actually admit supporting Hamas?
Yes, and Iran blames the United States for supporting Israel and its massacre of the Palestinian people and their oppression. So what Israel is doing, the kind of attitude and behavior and policies that they have towards the Palestinian people would be impossible without the economic support of the United States, also their sale of weapons to that regime, their legal support in terms of various international bodies where they are supporting Israel in different means. So of course, Iran supports any form of resistance against the settler colonial regime of Israel, and that's something that the Iranian people are very much proud of, and they consider this their duty to support people in their resistance against any type of oppression and humiliation. I think that the people in Iran believe, and also the government in Iran believes, that the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves.
Thank you very much, Professor Ilham Katkhodai. Thank you very much, Mr. Daoud Kutab from New York, for being my guest in the program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join with the last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back. I have with me in the studio Dr. Selma Malik. She is a professor from the Department of Defense and Strategic Studies of Quaid-e-Azam University. Madam, welcome to the program. We are talking about this issue between Palestine and Israel. And there's a problem with it. Whenever we talk about Israel doing these atrocities, Israel always responds on the international media that this is their right of self-defense that allow them to do whatever they want to do with the people living in Gaza and West Bank. How do you respond to it?
Well, that is actually a very, very fascinating technique that the Israelis have picked up. And what they have technically done is that by using these technical legal jargon, they have managed to justify any type of lethality, abuse of power, abuse of authority, violations of human rights, to totally kosher those activities. And to help them in that, they have the entire international system based on the Western powers, mainly the US, as well as the Western capitals, the European capitals, that support this initiative. If you may recall, way back when the Americans were planning preemptive strikes on Iraq, as part of the Operation Desert Storm and so many other notions, they again used this particular instrument of self-defense and helping people and humanitarian assistance, etc., and they used naked aggressive power against people. And they didn't only bomb those who were part of the military or security network, they bombed innocent civilians, which they very conveniently call collateral damage. So we see a similar pattern happening in Israel and the Palestinian scene, and this Sheikh Jarrah's neighborhood that became the latest problem here. And Israel says that, and it gets away with it, and there is no censoring of the issue. The Western capitals won't say anything, even the Muslim capitals won't say anything.
But Dr. Abba, this is a fact that while all of this clashes were happening in the West Bank and Jerusalem city, it was Hamas that started using the rocket attacks. To the worry of Israel, the range of these rockets are increasing and now reaching far-flung areas. Israel then started this aerial bombing thing. So that actually gives them a point to justify this naked, brute aggression, as you said.
Absolutely.
How do you comment on this?
2-3 things to that. Number one, if the Hamas had done what it had done, of course, we are receiving reports from the Western media, which in any case is tilted towards the Israeli viewpoint. It's favorable to the Israeli viewpoint. And what we have seen in these so many days is, courtesy the social media and all other stuff, there have been reports from the other side as well, and the type of atrocities that are taking place. But the very fact is that the media is totally hijacked and captured by the lobbies and their interest groups. And they would project only what they need to project. So if they need to create a pretext that Hamas has done what it has done, they should technically attack Hamas headquarters, or they should go and knock the doors of Hamas leadership. They should not go enter Al-Aqsa Mosque when people are offering prayers or nawafil and start attacking people and throwing grenades at them, and then attacking neighborhoods in which small kids are dying by the dozen, and saying that, oh, because Hamas did what it did, that is why we have bombed everyone from age 0 to age 100, because they could be potential Hamas operators. So that is something which does not make sense.
Dr. Sabha, did you just mention the deep pockets, as Shah Mahmood Qureshi said on a live interview with CNN, within the Western media? Did you refer to this?
Absolutely, absolutely.
But his remarks were declared as anti-Semitic.
Oh, obviously that would. That would happen, as you know, when you're calling a spade, the spade doesn't like being called that, right? But the very fact is that they don't want to see the mirror. They may talk about human rights when it comes to anything Pakistan does, or anything any other Muslim country does, or anything China does. So human rights, noise about the human rights becomes very, very vocal and very loud when it entrusts them. But this too is gross violation of human rights. Not only it's human rights, this is actually a genocidal activity by all means. The definition that the Western capitals have given on genocide, these activities entirely fulfill that particular definition. But the deep pockets, because the lobbies that are in work, not from today, not yesterday, but they have invested trillions and trillions of dollars, made the right type of investments in foreign capitals, even in our capitals, plus the fact that they have their people heading the media groups, the media powerhouses. So of course the opinion is going to be in their favor.
Is this the reason that you know, the media houses were targeted? The Office of Associated Press, Office of Al Jazeera was bombed down on a 10 minutes notice. Nobody could pull out anything except for their lives.
And this is a new trend that is happening in Palestine and Gaza, that you receive a telephone call, anonymous telephone call, or even not an anonymous telephone call, because they're very confident about it, and they say, I'm so and so, and now you're the target. So we are giving you 53 seconds to leave your house. How do you leave your house, which technically is something that you own for the last 100 years, full of memories, where you were born, where your grandparents were born, your children are born, and you're given 53 seconds to clear your life and head out. And where do you head out? You head out into the street, and another missile falls on you in the street, and you're dead. So you're better off dead in your own house. At least you get buried in the rubble, rather than you're out exposed and you don't, I mean, you get bombed to kingdom come, and no one recognizes those pieces of meat that are there. Unfortunately, I'm using a very crass word here. But the very fact is that those who tried to at least sensitize the international community about what had happened, they were made a target. And they were actually, we were conversing about it, that few journalists were sacked from these media houses because they were doing some fact finding and they were exposing certain realities. And they just condemned it. So the tolerance level is so low.
Dr. Sahiba, we have during this program discussed with one of my foreign participants in the program that over 50 times United States has stopped, vetoed resolutions against Israel. Now this is United Nations, a grand institution that everybody looks toward as the peace settler or as a peace provider umbrella for planet Earth. And this is now becoming a disappointment. Foreign Minister of Pakistan was very vocal when he spoke about it. How satisfied you are with this structure of United Nations that is so disbalanced in its very nature and so undemocratic in its very design?
Well, actually, one cannot be satisfied at all with such a faulty setup or infrastructure. You see, it's just like when Pakistan would pass resolutions or would try to table resolutions on Kashmir. Since 1971, there has been no resolution on Kashmir, or even if there were any resolutions tabled on Kashmir at the UNSC, the Russians, or the Soviet Union as we would call it previously, would veto it. So we would be frustrated and we would be saying all the negative stuff about the Soviet Union. But flip the table, and here you have the US, and the 50 times that you are mentioning, it is after 1972. Prior to that, they have been doing what they had been doing. So 53 times they have vetoed these resolutions, which technically means that they may consider themselves to be champions of human rights, but when it comes to Israeli interests, the lobbies are so strongly entrenched that the US cannot help but veto everything. Even this particular move for the ceasefire between Hamas and the Israeli security forces was vetoed thrice within the US, that it should not be brought on the UN table. And eventually it led to the ceasefire. It happened, and it happened on the Israeli terms, and then the US was okay about it. So I would actually say the US is totally hijacked by the Israelis, and because the US is calling the shots in the UN, so the UN is totally rendered redundant and toothless by powerhouses such as the USA.
Dr. Salma, whatever you just said reminds me of Samuel Huntington, who said it's clash of civilizations.
Absolutely.
So is what we are seeing right now, this division, this injustice, is it just attesting what he said in the past?
I think it's gone beyond testing. Huntington's this particular perspective that the entire civilizations are against the West, and how he defined the West, that really justifies the actions Americans and American allies or friendly states had undertaken on the US behest as of the end of the Cold War. And the entire world has been lit on fire. And when you look at Middle East and you look at the conflict map of Middle East, then you realize how intensely Middle East has been destroyed. And the fires that are lit in various countries in the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, this place, that place, then you realize, of course, Palestine is unfortunately in the thick of everything forever, that the Middle East is never going to be a peaceful place, so long as the US does not want it to. And Huntington's this commission study that he did, which became the talk of the town, it's still the flavor of the month, is something that one needs to read very carefully, not as part of a conspiracy, but also, or emotionally, but also to be seen as to how do we counter it. Unless and until we understand the dynamics of such mechanisms, we are just going to play victims to the Western discourse and not really come up with something viable to respond to.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salma Malik,
so
for
much.
being my guest in my program.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Shah Mahmood Qureshi, the Foreign Minister of Pakistan, said on the floor of United Nations, that without the presence of an international peacekeeping force, we can never guarantee positive peace or sustainable peace for the people of Palestine. This absence of violence, this absence of brute force is really not a solution that Palestinian people are wanting. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.